G'day and welcome to our lessons from 2020 number 8. Today we're talking about how ideology makes us idiots. I think it's responsible for some of the conflict we're seeing, for example, in the United States. The country seems more divided than ever. I think ideology has a part to play in that. And maybe social media as well, maybe our tribalism, which I think I talked about earlier. I also think we see that people are responding very differently to the coronavirus situation. You know, a lot of personality in it, but also a lot of ideology. So there's been some people who've been unable, no matter what is said, we're unable to convince them that there's a real disease out there. But there's also been kind of like in the media a kind of a presentation of the disease that doesn't fit the facts on the ground of how it's progressed and what it looks like. Why is that? Because ideology makes us idiots. What I mean by ideology is any story, any narrative, any worldview, any system of thought, any kind of history, and sometimes we come to it consciously, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes it's just what we've absorbed, but it's the way we think the world works. Now, what happens is our brains are actually designed to take pieces of information and make sense of them. That means we put them into some kind of story, some kind of pattern, some kind of belief system. So we're doing this automatically. It's the way we've been made. And so there's lots of information. But what ideology does is that when it settles into a fixed way of understanding the world, it can become a filter for new information. That is, you're in trouble when your way of looking at the world, your story about the world, stops you listening to new information. That's why you've got, so in that political confrontation, you've got people who can't actually acknowledge that people on the other side have points to make or that they have real concerns too. So we're all right and you're all wrong because when you say something, it doesn't match what I'm saying. It doesn't fit into my ideology. It's why you can have a white person who's never been racist, has tried to work very hard to be inclusive according to the norms that were current until about 12 months ago, being called racist just because they're white. Because that ideology doesn't care about evidence, but there's a way of thinking that shapes everything and won't allow new information. It's why sometimes you see even a Christian in churches who are so caught up in this theological system that even the Bible can't change their minds anymore. That's a terribly sad place to be. So that's what kind of creates some of the conflict that wouldn't need to be there if we could just listen to each other and say, you have a point. This is how I prefer to understand the world. This is how I'm making sense of it. But you do have a point. Let me see how I'm going to adjust my system. And I think that's the big take home from this one. If we're going to avoid those conflicts, if we're actually going to deal with coronavirus, if we're going to live in a real world, we have to be a little bit more humble and be teachable. Remember how many times Jesus talked about hard hearts and how many times he talked about opening your ears and how many times he talked about opening your eyes. We don't want to be hard-hearted people who've made up our mind that we know everything, that we're right and cannot learn anything anymore. It should be our goal as Christians to be teachable all the days of our lives. So then you keep that humility and you are able to listen to others, able to learn things, and you deal with the real world. You live in the real world because you can learn about the real world. So let's be humble, let's be teachable. I think another thing that it will that I think we should think about is I think we should be careful when our ideology, our worldview fits our personality or our situation or our aspirations too perfectly. Have you chosen that ideology because you like it, not because it's true? The real world actually has some sharp edges. So the things you believe actually should be sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes test you or stretch you, push you and actually make you uncomfortable. So for example, one example of that is the Christian faith tells us all that we're not good people, we needed a saviour. That's not an uncomfortable truth, but boy, it matches what we see in the world, doesn't it? The way people treat each other. And so I think as we work out how to deal with coronavirus, as we listen to conspiracy theories, as we deal with the propaganda that comes down, we have to actually remain teachable. We actually have to be willing to listen to things and seek to understand things and not be closed and unable to learn. All right. God bless you with that.